Tim Allen was America's favorite dad, but behind the man's man image was a much darker reality. In 2023, a shocking onset confrontation exposed the truth. A superstar who refused to look co-stars in the eye, and a crew walking on eggshells. When he dropped his iconic Santa cape and stormed off, a witness whispered the most chilling detail. "You're seeing him on a good day." From secret drug busts to toxic power plays, the silence has finally shattered. This is the pattern of defiance they tried to hide for decades. The architect of an alter ego. Timothy Allen Dick entered the world on June 13, 1953, in a vibrant Denver home where 6 children filled the hallways with a relentless, rhythmic noise. His mother, Martha, was a pillar of the community who spent her days assisting anyone in need, while his father, Gerald, carved out a stable existence in the real estate trade. To young Tim, their world was the definition of security. The days were uncomplicated, playing in the yard, shadowing his mother around the house, and eagerly awaiting his father's return from the office. As the third oldest among 5 brothers and 1 younger sister, the steady pulse of Denver in the late 50s and early 60s provided a childhood that felt unbreakable. He had no reason to suspect that the foundation of his life was about to shatter, but when tragedy finally struck, it decimated the only comfort he had ever known. That fateful day in November 1964 started with the mundane energy of any other morning. Gerald packed 6 of the children into the family car and set off for a University of Colorado football game. Tim was supposed to be in one of those seats, but a last-minute decision to wander over to a neighbor's house, a tiny shift in his daily routine, ultimately saved his life. As the family made their way home that afternoon along Interstate 70, a drunk driver veered across the center median and collided head-on with their vehicle. The impact was devastating. The children were tossed like rag dolls, leaving Tim's 2 older brothers with significant injuries. Gerald, however, was killed instantly. His neck was snapped, and his head came to rest in Martha's lap. He was the sole fatality, yet his death felt like a mortal blow to everyone left in that house. When 11-year-old Tim arrived home later that evening, the sight of police cruisers sent a hollow chill through his chest before a single word was uttered. His uncle met him with a cold, heavy instruction. He had to stay strong for his mother. In that singular moment, Tim was shoved into the complexities of adulthood long before he was ready. The sanctuary of school offered no reprieve from the pain. Classmates caught wind of his last name and transformed his daily life into a cruel, recurring joke. In his later memoirs, he recounted how boys would surround him with jagged laughter, weaponizing his name as if it were a dirty punchline. But rather than retreating into the shadows, Tim realized he could neutralize the malice with quick wit. He discovered that a well-timed jab could disarm his tormentors and flip the script. Humor began as a defensive shield, then evolved into a survival tool, and finally became a creative voice he didn't even realize he was cultivating. After the loss of his father, comedy took on a weight it had never possessed before. It wasn't just a performance, it was his only way to navigate the suffocating grief. Years later, he would reflect that those playground taunts and that sudden void were the catalysts for the strange magnetic power that would eventually transform his life into something legendary. 2 years after the wreckage of the accident, Martha reconnected with her high school sweetheart, Bill Bones, and the family began packing their lives into cardboard boxes. In 1966, they uprooted from Denver and moved to Birmingham, Michigan. Suddenly, 9 children were competing for space under one roof. The 6 from Martha's first marriage joined by the 3 from Bill's previous life. Tim was 13, still nursing deep emotional wounds, and the relocation felt like being dropped at the very bottom of a social ladder he had once climbed with ease. In Denver, he had roots and a reputation. In Michigan, he was a ghost in a new school where the hallways felt freezing and the faces were indifferent. He would later admit that he remained trapped in a cycle of adolescent rage for years. The move had stripped away the final shred of control he thought he possessed over his own destiny. The psychological scars created their own silent, enduring shadows. Tim frequently discussed how the sudden disappearance of his father rewired his entire internal map. He claimed it destroyed his sense of safety, leaving him with the belief that the world operated on a set of unpredictable, chaotic rules. November became a month of dread, and the arrival of autumn always left him with a lingering sense of unease. He carried a heavy burden of survivor's guilt for not being in the car that day. coupled with a persistent fear that everything he loved could be snatched away without warning. He held tightly to his father's memory, particularly through their shared obsession with automobiles. But that connection eventually twisted into an obsessive need for control that followed him into his adult years. While therapy later helped him untangle some of these knots, the core ache of that loss never truly faded. Life continued its march, and by 1976, he had earned a communications degree from Western Michigan University, supplemented by minors in philosophy and design. He secured a position at a sporting goods outlet before transitioning into the company's internal advertising wing, where his creative potential began to shine. He married Laura Dable in 1978, and to a casual observer, he appeared to be building a conventional, successful life. What the world didn't realize was that Detroit was being swallowed by a massive wave of cocaine during those years, and Tim was already caught in the undertow. Parallel to his legitimate career, he was operating as a drug trafficker. The fast cash felt effortless, and the thrill of the double life seemed sustainable. He maintained this dangerous equilibrium for about 2 years, weaving a network that generated thousands of dollars. But every deal pushed him further into a corner from which there was no easy escape. His secret life finally collapsed on October 2nd, 1978. He had orchestrated what he believed would be a $42,000 cocaine transaction at the Kalamazoo Battle Creek International Airport. His plan involved hiding over 650 grams of cocaine inside a public airport locker, with the intention of handing over the key and disappearing into the crowd. However, the moment his partner passed that key to the supposed buyer, the floor dropped out from under them. Weapons were drawn, and the area was swarmed by law enforcement. The buyer was actually an undercover officer who had been meticulously tracking Tim's movements for months. He and his associate were handcuffed on the spot. The sheer audacity of attempting such a high-level drug exchange inside an international airport made the entire bust feel like a surreal nightmare. He was suddenly facing a sentence that promised to end his life as he knew it. Michigan had enacted the 650 lifer law in 1973, which mandated life in prison without the possibility of parole for anyone caught with more than 650 grams of cocaine. At just 25 years old, Tim was looking at a future confined to a small concrete cell. His only lifeline was cooperation. He agreed to become an informant, providing authorities with a roadmap of the drug network and the names of those involved. His testimony helped secure indictments against roughly 20 individuals and led to multiple convictions. Because of this high-level cooperation, his case was moved to federal court, effectively bypassing the draconian Michigan state laws. His potential life sentence was commuted to a span of 3 to 7 years. Remarkably, the sentencing judge even remarked that he expected Tim to find success as a comedian one day, though at the time, that path seemed like a distant, impossible dream. Tim ended up serving 28 months at the Federal Correctional Institution in Sandstone, Minnesota, a location chosen to keep him far away from the associates he had helped put behind bars. Prison forced him into a grim environment populated by hardened criminals, a period of his life he remains notoriously tight-lipped about. He was finally paroled on June 12, 1981. A decade later, when home improvement became a cornerstone of 1990s television, ABC chose to bury this chapter of his history. Most fans watching the screen had absolutely no inkling that the man portraying America's favorite, accident-prone father had once stood in the shadow of a federal prison sentence after a high-stakes drug bust. The architect of an icon. When Timothy walked out of prison in 1981, he carried a perspective the world hadn't yet seen. He often spoke of leaving those iron gates with a profound sense of humility, a quality that had been entirely absent in his younger, more reckless years. While some critics later argued that he used his criminal past more as a punchline than a somber lesson, for Tim, simply surviving that ordeal had fundamentally rewritten his life's script. Interestingly, his journey into comedy had actually begun before his arrest, at Mark Ridley's Comedy Castle in Michigan. A friend had dared him to step onto the stage, and he had accepted the challenge on a whim. After his release, he returned to that same spotlight, but this time with a fierce, newfound discipline. The Comedy Castle became his laboratory, and by the time he set his sights on Los Angeles, he possessed the ironclad confidence required to forge a completely new identity. His most iconic material was born from a piece of advice Bob Seger once gave him: about the necessity of a hook. While performing at corporate gigs for giants like Goodyear, Tim observed rooms full of men who seemed to communicate almost entirely through grunts and gestures while eating. It triggered a memory of his own upbringing, a world where men didn't rely on words to express themselves. He began to mold this observation into a routine centered on masculinity and the clumsy, primal energy that men navigate through life. That signature, caveman-style grunt became his professional calling card. His riffs on men being pigs and their obsession with owning and fixing everything resonated deeply, turning his stand-up acts into sold-out events across the nation. By the closing years of the 1980s, he was a heavyweight in the stand-up circuit. He became a staple at the Comedy Store in Los Angeles and a frequent face on cable television. In 1988, he joined the ranks of comedy's Dirtiest Dozen, sharing the stage with future legends. 2 years later, in 1990, he filmed his groundbreaking special, Tim Allen, Men Are Pigs, in Kalamazoo, the very city where he had been arrested 12 years prior. This special served as a definitive audition for network executives, proving that his voice was exactly what television was missing. ABC launched Home Improvement on September 17, 1991, and the impact was tectonic. Despite having zero professional acting experience on television, Tim's transition was seamless. His character, Tim Taylor, was a perfect mirror of his stage persona, making viewers feel an instant familial connection. By the 1993 to 1994 season, the show peaked as the #1 program in the country. In a feat rarely seen in entertainment history, Tim simultaneously held the #1 slot at the box office and the top of the bestseller list. He had become a true American phenomenon. This unprecedented success translated into staggering financial rewards. In the show's infancy, he was earning between $200,000 and $300,000 per episode. As the ratings soared, so did his leverage. By the final seasons, his salary hit $1,250,000 per episode, roughly equivalent to $2 million in today's economy. Over the course of 204 episodes, his career earnings rocketed into the tens of millions, eventually anchoring his net worth near the $100 million mark. However, the atmosphere behind the scenes wasn't always as wholesome as the on-screen family dynamic. In her 2023 memoir, Pamela Anderson alleged that during her first day on set in 1991, Tim exposed himself to her in a hallway as a joke, claiming they were now even because he had seen her work in Playboy. While she laughed it off at the time, she later described the encounter as deeply unsettling. Tim firmly denied the allegation when it went public. That same year, a 1992 blooper resurfaced showing Tim lifting his kilt toward Patricia Richardson. Richardson later clarified that he was wearing underwear, and she was merely startled by the prank. But the incidents combined to cast a shadow over the era's workplace culture. Home Improvement dominated the ratings for nearly a decade, famously outperforming Seinfeld in head-to-head matchups for years. In December 1994, it pulled a 22.1 rating against Seinfeld's 18.1. This dominance gave Tim immense power within ABC. By 1998, his per-episode pay hit $1,250,000. At its height, the show attracted nearly 33 million weekly viewers, surpassing even Friends. During the 8th and final season, which featured 25 episodes, Tim's take-home pay alone was at least $31,250,000. This was one of the most aggressive salary escalations the industry had ever witnessed. When ABC attempted to greenlight a 9th season in 1999, the stakes became astronomical. The network offered Allen $50 million for a single year, $2 million for each of the 25 planned episodes. Had he signed, he would have been the highest-paid actor in TV history. While he initially leaned toward saying yes, the momentum halted when Patricia Richardson declined the offer. The truth was that Tim would have happily continued if the deal had gone through. The tension peaked when it was revealed that ABC offered Richardson only half of Allen's pay, $25 million, despite her equal importance to the show's success as Jill Taylor. She was also denied an executive producer credit, a title Allen already held. Richardson stood her ground, demanding pay equity she knew the network wouldn't grant, effectively using the demand as a way to say no. As the show concluded, the public narrative shifted the blame onto Richardson for ending the hit series. Tim remained notably silent as the media painted her as the actress who walked away from a fortune. never mentioning the massive pay disparity that had fueled the conflict. Meanwhile, Jonathan Taylor Thomas, who had played the middle son Randy since he was 10 years old, had already begun his exit. After becoming a global teen idol and the voice of young Simba in The Lion King, Thomas chose to leave during season 8. In a 1998 interview with Conan O'Brien, he explained his simple desire to return to a normal life, attend school, and be a regular teenager. He stayed true to his word, eventually studying at Harvard, St. Andrews, and Columbia, graduating in 2010. His departure marked the beginning of the end for the Taylor family's historic run. The friction of the return. Tim Allen did not navigate the departure of his on-screen son with grace. In a series of public interviews, he openly scrutinized Jonathan Taylor Thomas's motivations. Speaking with TV Guide, Allen expressed genuine confusion, noting that while Thomas claimed he wanted to focus on his education, he was still appearing in films. He questioned aloud whether the young actor truly sought academic life or was simply chasing a different movie career, and these pointed remarks spread like wildfire. To the public, Allen sounded frustrated, but to Thomas, the comments felt like an unnecessary exposure. After working side by side for 7 years, this public critique cut deeper than most realized. A sense of betrayal lingered because Allen's narrative suggested Thomas hadn't been truthful, even though his commitment to a normal life eventually proved genuine. This underlying tension manifested clearly in 1999 when Thomas declined to return for the series finale. The final episode, which aired on May 25, 1999, drew a staggering 35,500,000 viewers, one of the decade's biggest television farewells. Every primary cast member returned to take a bow, except for him. Patricia Richardson later described his absence as a sore point, admitting that while she felt skipping the finale was a mistake, she understood that the teenager wasn't receiving the guidance he needed to navigate the conflict. His empty seat signaled that the rift between him and Allen was far from healed. He refused to pretend everything was perfect for the cameras. Years later, when Thomas finally agreed to guest star on Last Man Standing, the ghost of that old friction remained. He appeared in 3 episodes across 2013 and 2014 as a character named John Baker. In 2015, the dynamic shifted into something even stranger when he returned to play a character named Randy during a guest appearance by Patricia Richardson. This meta-wink to the past felt hollow to some. Fans noted a certain stiffness on screen and a palpable distance in their shared scenes. Thomas seemed present but emotionally detached, appearing almost as a polite favor rather than a creative passion. Those episodes marked his final television performances before he retreated entirely into private life, leaving a lingering sense that his relationship with Allen never truly found a resolution. When Last Man Standing premiered on October 11, 2011, it was billed as Allen's triumphant return to the sitcom throne. The pilot pulled in over 13 million viewers, introducing Mike Baxter, a conservative patriarch running a sporting goods empire. Allen modeled the character after Archie Bunker, using video blog segments to deliver sharp political commentary, often directed at President Obama. While critics initially dismissed the show as outdated, the audience remained loyal. Even when ABC moved the show to the death slot on Friday nights and trimmed the episode count from 24 to 13, the ratings stayed remarkably resilient. By the 2016 to 2017 season, the show was a powerhouse, averaging 8,100,000 viewers. It was ABC's second highest rated comedy, trailing only Modern Family, and ranked 3rd among all scripted shows on the network, just behind Grey's Anatomy. While other sitcoms withered, Last Man Standing thrived because conservative viewers in Middle America felt a rare sense of representation. To them, the show was a weekly ritual, even as Hollywood critics continued to look the other way. Then came the shockwave. On May 10, 2017, ABC abruptly canceled the show, despite its rock-solid ratings. The internet erupted with theories that Allen was being silenced for his political stance. While the network claimed they were simply moving away from Friday night comedies, the explanation rang hollow to a fan base that saw one of their only hits discarded. The controversy turned political overnight, and Allen leaned into the fire. He famously told Norm Macdonald that a funny conservative man was dangerous to Hollywood. And on Jimmy Kimmel, he controversially compared the treatment of conservatives in the industry to the climate of 1930s Germany. The eventual revival on Fox in 2018 proved the demand was undeniable. The Fox premiere on September 28 drew 8 million viewers and a 1.8 rating, instantly becoming the network's most watched comedy in nearly 7 years. However, behind the political headlines, the business reality was more complex. ABC didn't own the show, Fox did. This made the licensing fees expensive, especially with Allen's salary hovering around $235,000 per episode. Combined with whispers of Allen being difficult on set, the production costs made the cancellation a logical business move for ABC, even as the public viewed it through a cultural lens. Finally, on November 16, 2022, Disney Plus launched The Santa Clauses. It was a nostalgic return to the red suit for Allen, 28 years after the original 1994 film. The series found Scott Calvin nearing his 65th birthday, struggling as his North Pole magic began to fade. Production had started quietly in Los Angeles earlier that March, bringing back familiar faces like Casey Wilson as the adult Sarah, the little girl who once offered Santa soy milk. Now, a disillusioned adult, her character served as the emotional anchor for the story. Allen noted that their reunion was designed to shake Santa to his core, proving that even in a world of magic, nothing stays the same forever. The cracked mirror of magic. The production of The Santa Clauses hit a wall during the pivotal chimney scene, a moment designed to be a masterclass in physical comedy. Sarah, played by Casey Wilson, was supposed to react in a panic, hurling objects at Santa as he tumbled into her home. It required a delicate comedic rhythm, yet the energy on set turned brittle almost instantly. Wilson later recalled that while the cameras were rolling, the necessary trust between co-stars simply wasn't there. A producer stood a mere 4 feet away, close enough to catch every whisper, as the lighthearted scene dissolved into a heavy, silent tension. Midway through the shoot, Tim Allen abruptly halted. Rather than addressing Wilson, he turned to the nearby producer to complain that she was stepping on his lines. Wilson, standing right there, heard every word. The producer, visibly stunned, took a small, awkward step toward her to relay the message. Being discussed as if she weren't in the room felt like a public slap to Wilson. What should have been a routine professional adjustment between actors became a moment of profound embarrassment. The hostility didn't end when the cameras cut. Wilson noted that Allen refused to make eye contact or speak to her during breaks. The atmosphere became so thick with unease that the crew began walking on eggshells. After finishing one segment, Allen suddenly declared he was done for the day. He unfastened his velvet Santa cape, let it drop unceremoniously to the floor, and walked out. As crew members scrambled to retrieve the discarded costume, a stand-in was brought in to finish his work. The most telling moment came quietly. As Wilson stood processing the chaos, a crew member leaned in and whispered, "You're seeing him on a good day." Those 7 words revealed a long-standing pattern of behavior that the staff had simply learned to manage. Wilson initially stayed silent for over a year out of respect for her friend, the producer, but that silence shattered in December 2023 on her podcast, Bitch Sesh. She didn't hold back, labeling the experience the worst of her career and describing Allen as hostile and dismissive. As her story went viral, older grievances resurfaced. Patricia Richardson publicly called out Allen for claiming the Home Improvement cast was on board for a reboot, revealing he hadn't even contacted her or Jonathan Taylor Thomas. It pointed to a recurring theme: Allen speaking for others without their consent. By early 2026, at 72 years old, Allen has remained defiant. On various talk shows, he has framed his behavior as old-school professionalism, offering no apologies or reflection on the bridge burning that has defined his later years. Tim Allen's legacy is a complex masterpiece of unmatched success and self-inflicted wounds. He built an empire on a grunt and a red suit, but the bridges he burned along the way may be what defines his final act. Was he a perfectionist pushing for comedy gold, or a star who let the power fracture his finest relationships? The verdict is yours. Let us know what you think in the comments.